It was a quiet evening, and the sun was starting to set behind the tall trees lining the neighborhood. The sky had that soft orange glow that made everything look calm and peaceful. Inside the house, the homeowner was sitting on the couch with a warm cup of tea, enjoying the rare moment of silence. After a long day, it felt nice to finally relax and take a few minutes to breathe. The house was tidy, the lights were soft, and the world outside seemed far away. Everything felt normal, calm, and safe. Then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but persistent enough to make the homeowner pause. At first, there was a moment of doubt. Maybe it was just a delivery person. Maybe a neighbor needed help. But as the footsteps approached the door, the homeowner saw a familiar figure through the small window by the front door. It was Karen. Karen was well known in the neighborhood and not always in a good way. She had a reputation for being pushy and controlling, always wanting things to go her way. Sometimes she would ask for small favors, and other times she would try to insert herself into situations where she had no place. Most people avoided her when they could. The homeowner had learned to be polite but firm, and they always kept a careful distance. Karen was holding a package and her eyes were bright with urgency. She waved it in the air and her smile looked a little forced. She didn't wait for an invitation. She said she needed to come inside to check something important. Her tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of insistence, a way of speaking that left very little room for a no. The homeowner took a deep breath and kept their voice calm. They told Karen that they were not comfortable letting anyone in uninvited, and that they preferred to handle things at the door. Karen's smile faltered for a moment. There was a flicker of surprise, then a hint of irritation. She tilted her head and said she would only be a minute, that it was really important. The homeowner stayed firm, repeating that they preferred to speak from outside. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned closer to the door, pressing the package against it. The homeowner felt a small wave of nervousness. They had dealt with Karen before, but this intensity was new. Karen wasn't used to being refused. She was used to getting her way by insisting, by putting pressure on people. But this time, the homeowner stood their ground. They explained politely but clearly that there was no need for her to come inside, that everything could be discussed through the door. Karen's expression changed completely. The friendly smile was gone, replaced with a hard, tight look. She muttered something under her breath and stepped back, pretending to walk away. But she didn't leave the yard. Instead, she turned and looked at the homeowner with a mixture of frustration and defiance. The homeowner could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm evening had suddenly grown dark and cold. The homeowner knew that Karen had a tendency to escalate situations when she didn't get what she wanted. It wasn't the first time someone had dealt with her insistence, but this felt different. This time it wasn't just a small annoyance. It felt like a challenge, a test of boundaries. Karen was clearly not going to accept the polite refusal quietly. As the minutes passed, the homeowner tried to keep calm. They didn't want to argue, didn't want to give Karen any reason to feel justified in her pushiness. They stepped slightly back from the door, keeping their hands visible, showing that there was no threat, no hostility, just a calm and steady presence. Karen, on the other hand, seemed to be thinking, planning, trying to figure out how to push past the refusal. Then, as if making a decision, Karen's expression shifted once more. She raised her eyebrows, made a small gesture toward the phone in her pocket, and said she would call someone if necessary. The words were soft, almost casual, but the intent was clear. The homeowner's stomach tightened. They had seen this behavior before in other situations. It was the kind of threat that made people uneasy, because it wasn't just empty words. Karen had a history of involving authorities unnecessarily to get what she wanted. The homeowner took a deep breath and tried to steady themselves. They knew that staying calm was the most important thing. They couldn't let fear dictate their actions. They spoke slowly and clearly, telling Karen that there was no reason to involve anyone, that the situation could be handled calmly without anyone needing to escalate it. Karen's eyes flicked away for a moment, a sign that she was trying to maintain control, to look confident even as her plan to intimidate might be starting to falter. At this point, a few neighbors had noticed the small gathering by the front door. One of them had come outside to see if everything was okay. The homeowner nodded to them, giving a small, reassuring smile, but stayed focused on Karen. They didn't want the attention to add any tension. Karen, however, seemed to thrive on attention. Her posture straightened and she spoke a little louder, just enough for the neighbors to hear, claiming that she needed to enter the home for an important reason. The homeowner's calmness didn't waver. They repeated that there was no need for her to enter, that the matter could be resolved outside the door. Karen's frustration was growing more visible. Her gestures became sharper, her voice slightly louder, and she stepped a little closer. The homeowner noticed their heart rate quicken but reminded themselves to breathe. They had handled difficult people before, and they knew the key was to stay composed and not let anger or fear take control. Finally, Karen made a small exclamation and stepped back. She didn't leave completely, though, choosing instead to stand a few feet away and glare. The homeowner knew this was far from over. Karen was the type to hold grudges, to escalate situations when she felt she was being denied. The evening had started peacefully, and now it was charged with tension. The homeowner realized they would need to stay vigilant, to remain calm and collected no matter what happened next. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, the homeowner stood by the door, watching Karen. They thought about all the ways the evening could unfold, each scenario playing in their mind. They reminded themselves that they had done nothing wrong, that setting boundaries was their right, and that remaining polite and firm was the best approach. At that moment, the homeowner made a quiet promise to themselves. They would handle whatever came next with the same calmness, with patience, and without giving in to intimidation. They didn't know if Karen would leave quietly or try something more drastic, but they were determined to stay composed. The night might have shifted from peaceful to tense, but the homeowner knew that their strength was in staying steady, in controlling their own reactions rather than letting someone else dictate their emotions. The first part of the evening ended with the homeowner still standing at the door, calm but alert. The air was cooler now, and the shadows stretched across the lawn, creating a quiet but uneasy atmosphere. Karen's figure lingered in the distance, and the homeowner could feel that this encounter was far from over. But for now, they had set their boundary, had remained polite yet firm, and had taken the first step in handling a situation that could have easily spiraled out of control. The stage was set for what would come next, a moment that would test patience, composure, and the strength of standing firm against someone determined to push limits. After the tense encounter at the door, the homeowner returned inside, trying to shake off the lingering unease. The house felt smaller now, quieter in a way that made every creak of the floorboards and hum of the refrigerator feel amplified. They took a deep breath and tried to focus on something calming, but their mind kept returning to Karen standing outside, her glare sharp and unwavering even as the sun set. The homeowner tried to remind themselves that they had handled the situation politely and firmly, but a feeling of dread began to grow. Not long after, the distant wail of sirens broke the evening calm. The homeowner's heart skipped a beat. They paused, staring out the window, and then saw the flashing lights approaching the house. Instinctively, a mix of nervousness and frustration welled up. Karen had indeed followed through on her threat. She had called 911. The homeowner felt a swirl of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a hint of irritation. It was one thing for Karen to be pushy or rude, but involving authorities without cause was another level entirely. As the lights came closer, the homeowner took a steadying breath. They reminded themselves that they had done nothing wrong. Refusing entry to someone without invitation was within their rights, and they had acted calmly and politely. Still, the sudden arrival of police officers added pressure to an already tense situation. The homeowner straightened their posture, trying to project calm confidence even as their hands felt slightly clammy. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house, and officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of curiosity and professionalism. They approached with measured steps, hands resting near their belts. The homeowner opened the door to greet them, explaining the situation as clearly and calmly as possible. They described the encounter with Karen, how she had knocked and demanded entry, and how they had politely declined. They emphasized that no one was threatening anyone, and that everything had remained under control until Karen left the immediate vicinity. Karen, standing just a few feet away, immediately began her side of the story. Her voice was louder now, projecting an air of urgency and concern. She claimed that the homeowner had acted aggressively, that she had been worried for her safety, and that she had no choice but to call for help. The homeowner listened quietly, noticing how quickly Karen exaggerated details, using words and gestures that didn't match what had actually happened. Her energy was full of frustration and desperation, the kind that only comes when someone is trying to manipulate the situation in their favor. The officers exchanged glances, reading the tension in the yard. They asked Karen for specifics, details that could be verified. Karen hesitated, faltered, and repeated her claims without providing any real evidence. Meanwhile, the homeowner maintained a calm and steady demeanor, answering questions truthfully and clearly. The officers could sense the contrast immediately. One officer, in particular, seemed to take note of the homeowner's composure, nodding slightly as they listened to the story unfold. Neighbors began to appear in small clusters. Drawn by the flashing lights and the tension at the door, some whispered to one another. Others simply watched from across the street. Karen seemed to feed off this attention, her gestures becoming more animated, her voice rising a little with each statement. The homeowner felt a small wave of anxiety at the growing audience but reminded themselves to stay calm. Losing composure would only give Karen the impression that her claims carried weight. The homeowner calmly described the boundaries they had set, explaining that they had simply refused entry, nothing more. They emphasized that there had been no threats, no aggressive gestures, no dangerous behavior. As they spoke, they noticed that the officers were beginning to see the inconsistencies in Karen's story. Questions that seemed simple, like what time she arrived, what she said, and why she felt threatened, revealed small gaps and exaggerations. Karen tried to cover them up with vague statements and repetition, but the officers were attentive and precise. As the conversation continued, the homeowner realized that this was no longer just a confrontation at the door. It had become a test of truth and patience. The officers asked Karen to explain what had made her feel unsafe, and she struggled to provide a coherent answer. Meanwhile, the homeowner remained calm, polite, and detailed in their responses. They described each moment accurately without embellishment, showing that their actions had been reasonable and measured. A sense of relief began to creep in as the homeowner noticed the officers' demeanor shift. They were nodding, taking notes, and asking clarifying questions that highlighted the discrepancies in Karen's account. The homeowner could see Karen's frustration growing, her confidence slowly slipping as the officers remained neutral and professional, treating the situation as a matter of fact rather than taking her side. The atmosphere in the yard was tense but controlled. The neighbors watching had a front row seat to the unfolding events. Some whispered to each other about Karen's behavior. Others looked at the homeowner with respect for staying calm under pressure. The homeowner felt a quiet sense of reassurance, knowing that maintaining composure was starting to make a difference. Karen, sensing that the situation was not going entirely in her favor, began to raise her voice slightly, trying to regain control. She insisted that she had been truthful and that the homeowner was lying. But the officers remained calm and impartial, asking pointed questions that revealed contradictions in her statements. The homeowner stayed silent during this part, letting the facts speak for themselves. Their silence and consistency were beginning to have an effect. Karen's attempts to intimidate seemed increasingly futile. At one point, one officer stepped slightly closer to the homeowner, offering a small, reassuring nod. It was a subtle gesture, but it gave the homeowner a sense of support and confidence. The presence of authority on their side, coupled with their own calmness, began to ease the tension that had felt so heavy moments earlier. Karen, on the other hand, was visibly flustered. Her voice faltered, her gestures became less confident, and her claims started to lose credibility in the eyes of everyone watching. The homeowner continued to answer questions with clarity and honesty. They explained that they had been mindful of safety, that they had kept the interaction polite, and that they had no intention of causing any harm. Their tone remained steady, and their words reflected truth and calmness. The officers were able to verify key details, and it became clear that the homeowner had acted responsibly and within their rights. Karen's frustration turned to embarrassment as her story began to unravel in front of the neighbors. The homeowner noticed her attempts to maintain a strong front faltering. The officer's careful and professional approach had highlighted her exaggerations without needing confrontation. The homeowner realized that they had been right to remain calm and composed, knowing that truth and patience could overcome attempts to manipulate and intimidate. As the conversation wound down, one officer addressed Karen, explaining that there was no reason for charges to be filed. They reiterated that the homeowner had the right to set boundaries, that refusing entry was not a crime, and that the call had been unnecessary. Karen's face shifted through a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and finally resignation. She muttered under her breath and took a step back, clearly realizing that she had overstepped. The homeowner breathed a small sigh of relief, feeling the tension begin to lift. The officers took a few more moments to ensure that everyone understood the situation, then concluded the interaction professionally. They reassured the homeowner that their response had been appropriate and that they had handled the situation perfectly. Karen, now fully aware that her plan had failed, began to walk away, her posture tight, her expression a mixture of defeat and irritation. Neighbors lingered for a moment, offering quiet support and admiration for the homeowner's composure. Some shared that they had noticed Karen's behavior before and understood how difficult it could be to deal with her. The homeowner felt a sense of relief mixed with pride. They had stayed calm under pressure, handled an escalating situation without losing their composure, and maintained control without aggression. As the sirens faded and the police cars drove away, the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm. The homeowner closed the door, taking a moment to breathe and reflect. The evening had started peacefully, then turned tense and unpredictable, but they had handled it well. They knew that staying calm, clear, and composed had been the key to resolving the situation without escalation. The night was no longer just about an unexpected visit. It had become a lesson in patience, dignity, and standing firm when confronted with unreasonable demands. The homeowner settled back inside, grateful for the support of the officers and the quiet presence of the neighbors. The air in the house seemed lighter now, and the sense of control had returned. They reflected on the encounter, realizing that while Karen had tried to create chaos, truth and calmness had prevailed. The stage was set for the next chapter, a moment where the homeowner would continue to navigate the aftermath, dealing with emotions, consequences, and the unexpected dynamics that had unfolded in their quiet neighborhood. The morning after the tense encounter, the homeowner woke up with a mix of relief and lingering unease. Although the situation with Karen seemed to have been resolved without escalation, the memory of her insistence and the arrival of the police lingered. The sun streamed through the windows and the house looked peaceful again, but the homeowner knew that this was only a temporary calm. Karen was the kind of person who didn't give up easily. She could hold grudges and find new ways to challenge others, especially if she felt embarrassed or powerless. The homeowner went about their usual morning routine, making breakfast and tidying up the kitchen. Despite the normalcy of the day, a small part of their mind kept replaying the previous evening. They thought about the officer's calm professionalism and how it had diffused the tension. That had been the key, they realized. The way authority combined with patience and composure had turned the situation in their favor. Yet they knew it was possible Karen might try something else. Staying alert while not letting fear take over seemed to be the wisest approach. As the homeowner went through their chores, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Their stomachs sank for a moment. They hesitated, looking through the window, and were relieved to see it was one of the neighborhood mail carriers rather than Karen. The brief moment of panic reminded them just how strongly the previous evening had affected their nerves. They told themselves that they couldn't let these encounters steal peace from their daily life. Strength came from facing uncomfortable moments without letting them dictate emotions. Later that morning, a familiar voice called from outside the window. It was Officer Thompson, the officer who had handled the 911 call the night before. The homeowner had known Officer Thompson for years. He had been a mentor figure when they first moved into the neighborhood. His presence brought an immediate sense of calm and reassurance. It was unexpected, but welcome. The officer smiled warmly, explaining that he had been nearby on another call and wanted to stop by to ensure that everything was okay. The homeowner invited him inside, grateful for the support and for someone to talk to about the experience. Over coffee, they discussed the incident in detail. The officer listened attentively, asking questions about Karen's behavior, her history in the neighborhood, and what had happened step by step. The homeowner explained everything honestly, even the parts that had been uncomfortable or awkward. Officer Thompson nodded, occasionally jotting down notes, but mostly he just listened. The simple act of recounting the events to someone trustworthy helped the homeowner process the situation. It was one thing to remain calm in the moment. It was another to reflect on it and understand how effectively they had handled the challenge. As the conversation continued, The officer shared insights from his perspective. He explained how Karen's behavior was consistent with people who tried to manipulate authority and social situations to their advantage. He pointed out how the homeowner's patience and clarity had prevented escalation. Hearing this helped the homeowner see their own strength. They had remained composed under pressure without aggression and without giving Karen the satisfaction of control. It was empowering to hear that their instincts and actions had been correct. At one point, Officer Thompson paused and said something that caught the homeowner off guard. He reminded them that not all authority figures act with fairness and understanding, and that it was rare to have someone with experience and integrity involved in such situations. The officer's words highlighted the importance of relationships and trust. The homeowner realized that having someone familiar, who understood their character, had been a key factor in diffusing the situation. Without that presence, things might have felt much more stressful and unpredictable. As the conversation with the officer wound down, the homeowner felt a renewed sense of confidence. They began thinking about the next steps. Karen might try to challenge them again, or perhaps word of the incident would spread, causing gossip or tension in the neighborhood. But now, the homeowner felt equipped to handle whatever came next. The combination of calm reflection, trusted support, and a clear understanding of their rights provided a framework to face challenges without panic. They weren't powerless. They were prepared. The officer left with a friendly wave, leaving the homeowner with a quiet sense of reassurance. They spent the rest of the day focusing on normal tasks, allowing themselves to feel the sense of stability slowly return. Chores, cooking, and small projects around the house provided a comforting rhythm. The memory of Karen's insistence was still there, but it had lost its ability to intimidate. Reflection had turned anxiety into a learning experience, and the homeowner could appreciate the growth that had come from it. Later that afternoon, the homeowner stepped outside to check the garden. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dancing shadows across the lawn. The neighborhood was peaceful again, and children played nearby, their laughter echoing in the warm air. The homeowner felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Despite the tension with Karen, the world outside was still full of normal life, reminders of community and human connection that didn't involve conflict. These moments grounded them, bringing perspective that one difficult encounter didn't define their environment or their peace of mind. While tending the garden, the homeowner noticed subtle signs that neighbors were watching, curious about what had happened the night before. Some offered quiet smiles or gentle waves, small acknowledgments of support and recognition. The homeowner returned the gestures, feeling bolstered by the awareness that they weren't alone in navigating complex social interactions. Karen's presence and actions might have caused temporary stress, but the homeowner realized they were surrounded by people who valued fairness, kindness, and understanding. As the sun dipped lower, the homeowner began reflecting on the lessons from the past 2 days. They understood that boundaries were vital, and that asserting them firmly yet politely was not rude. It was necessary. They recognized that fear or anger could make situations worse, while patience and clarity could transform potential conflict into manageable challenges. They also appreciated the importance of allies, whether they were trusted officers, neighbors, or friends, and how these connections could provide both emotional and practical support. The evening approached, and the homeowner settled inside once again. The house felt like a sanctuary, a place where calm and reflection could replace tension and worry. They poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. Shadows lengthened, and the sky turned shades of pink and purple. The world seemed vast and steady, in contrast to the brief storm of the previous night. The homeowner felt a sense of empowerment, understanding that maintaining composure and truthfulness had a greater impact than any moment of fear or uncertainty. As night fell, the homeowner felt prepared for the possibility of Karen returning or attempting another challenge. They had learned that preparation, calmness, and clear communication were tools to handle difficult situations effectively. They also understood that community, relationships, and support networks mattered as much as personal resolve. The lessons of the previous night were no longer abstract. They were practical and deeply personal, shaping how they would navigate future interactions. The day ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment. The homeowner had faced stress, confrontation, and unpredictability, and had emerged with clarity and confidence. They understood that power came not from force or aggression, but from the ability to remain steady, to speak truthfully, and to act with dignity. The night was calm once more, the house peaceful, and the homeowner ready to face whatever came next with the same resilience and composure that had guided them through the beginning of this unexpected chapter in their life. A few days had passed since the incident with Karen, and the neighborhood had returned to its normal rhythm. Birds sang in the trees, children played in the yards, and neighbors went about their daily routines. Yet the homeowner remained cautious. They knew Karen's type too well, someone who didn't easily accept embarrassment or failure. There was a lingering tension in the back of their mind, a quiet awareness that she could try to stir trouble again. The morning started quietly. The homeowner was preparing breakfast, the aroma of coffee filling the kitchen. They moved through the tasks with a sense of calm, practicing mindfulness and enjoying the small moments. It felt good to focus on the ordinary, to ground themselves in routine. But just as they were clearing the dishes, the sound of tires rolling slowly on the driveway made them pause. They looked out the window and saw Karen's car parked near the end of the street. She hadn't come to the door yet, but just the sight of her triggered a mix of anticipation and resolve. The homeowner took a deep breath and reminded themselves to stay calm. There was no reason to react impulsively. They decided to handle whatever was coming with the same patience and clarity that had guided them in the previous encounter. Karen eventually approached the front yard, her steps purposeful, carrying that same determined expression. This time she didn't knock immediately. Instead, she waited at a distance as if measuring the situation and planning her approach. Neighbors began to notice, some stepping out onto their porches or peeking through windows. Word of the previous incident had spread, and a few people were curious to see what would happen next. The homeowner could feel the subtle pressure of an audience, but they reminded themselves that their composure mattered more than appearances. Karen, noticing the eyes on her, seemed to feed off the attention, adjusting her stance, making herself look bigger and more assertive. Finally, she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. She claimed she needed to speak with the homeowner immediately about an urgent matter. The homeowner responded calmly from inside the doorway, saying that they were happy to talk, but it could be done from a safe distance outside. Karen, clearly frustrated by the lack of immediate compliance, took a step closer, raising her voice slightly. The homeowner stayed steady, speaking politely but firmly, emphasizing that boundaries mattered and that any conversation could occur respectfully outside the house. At this point, a few neighbors, recognizing the tension, came closer to observe discreetly. Their presence was not meant to intervene, but to witness. They had seen Karen's behavior before and understood how she operated. The homeowner noticed that while her gestures and words were dramatic, they lacked real force. This gave them confidence, reinforcing that remaining calm and composed was the best response. Karen tried to escalate by hinting at calling authorities again. The homeowner's eyes narrowed slightly, but their tone remained calm. They explained once more that there was no reason for anyone else to be involved, and that the conversation could be resolved peacefully without drama. Karen, realizing that her usual tactics were not working, began to visibly lose confidence. Her gestures became sharper, less fluid, and her words more repetitive. The power of patience and truth was beginning to show. Suddenly, the familiar sound of a police car approaching caught both the homeowner and Karen off guard. Officer Thompson, the same officer who had handled the previous incident, appeared once more. He had noticed the potential for escalation and decided to stop by to ensure the situation remained calm. His presence had a grounding effect immediately. The homeowner felt reassured while Karen, expecting no familiar authority, stiffened slightly, her earlier confidence wavering. Officer Thompson greeted the homeowner with a friendly nod and spoke directly to Karen. He asked her calmly to explain her reason for being there and reminded her of the importance of resolving issues peacefully. Karen began to speak, but her words stumbled as the officer's neutral, composed presence created an atmosphere in which exaggeration or manipulation could no longer succeed. The homeowner watched quietly, letting the facts and Officer Thompson's guidance guide the interaction. The officer asked Karen to describe what she hoped to achieve and the steps she had taken before coming to the homeowner's house. Her answers were vague and inconsistent, revealing that her urgency was more about proving herself right than resolving any real issue. The homeowner realized that Karen's behavior was no longer a threat. It was an attempt to regain control in a situation where she had lost face. Remaining calm, letting the facts speak and allowing the officer's presence to provide authority turned the tide completely. The neighbors watching began to notice the difference in the dynamics. Karen's attempts to dominate the situation fell flat, while the homeowner's steady composure, combined with Officer Thompson's support, created a clear contrast. The homeowner could feel the respect of the bystanders, who saw that remaining polite, calm, and firm was far more powerful than anger or shouting. Karen's energy began to drain as she realized that the audience, the homeowner, and the officer were not responding to intimidation. Officer Thompson then guided Karen through a series of questions that helped her see her own exaggerations. She began to fidget and glance around, noticing the watching neighbors, and her confidence dropped further. The homeowner stayed silent, simply responding to the officer's questions when needed and maintaining a calm, non-threatening presence. It was clear that Karen's plan to cause discomfort had failed. After several minutes, the officer turned to the homeowner and asked if they felt safe and comfortable. The homeowner nodded, explaining that they had maintained control and did not feel threatened. Officer Thompson then addressed Karen one final time, reminding her of the importance of respect and boundaries, and explaining that the homeowner had the right to manage their own property and interactions. Karen, now visibly deflated, muttered something under her breath and took a small step back. The situation had reached a resolution. Karen had attempted to regain control and assert authority through manipulation, but the combined effect of patience, truth, and the presence of a trusted officer rendered her efforts ineffective. The homeowner felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, recognizing that their composure had played a critical role in diffusing the situation without confrontation or escalation. As Karen finally retreated toward her car, the neighbors offered small smiles and waves to the homeowner, acknowledging their strength and calmness. The homeowner returned the gestures, feeling a renewed sense of community support and confidence. They realized that standing firm in one's truth, while remaining calm and respectful, could create a powerful impact, even in situations designed to intimidate or provoke. Once Karen had left, Officer Thompson spent a few more minutes talking with the homeowner, offering guidance on handling potential future encounters and emphasizing the importance of maintaining boundaries and composure. He reminded them that knowing one's rights, combined with a clear mind and calm demeanor, was a strong defense against manipulation or intimidation. The homeowner took a deep breath as the officer finally departed. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting warm, golden light across the neighborhood. The house felt calm once again, and the homeowner felt a sense of pride and relief. They had faced a potentially tense and intimidating situation, handled it gracefully, and come out unscathed. The lessons of patience, truth, and support had been reinforced in real life, and the experience had strengthened their confidence in navigating challenges with dignity and composure. Later that evening, the homeowner sat quietly by the window, reflecting on the events of the past days. They appreciated the small but meaningful support of the neighbors, the guidance of Officer Thompson, and most importantly, their own ability to remain steady under pressure. Karen's behavior had been a test, and the homeowner had passed it with grace and calmness. The night was peaceful again, and they knew that whatever challenges might come in the future, they were better prepared to face them with patience, clarity, and confidence.